now we've got another guy interviewing you now, Jimmy Willing. How are you, Jimmy?
Pretty good, man.
And welcome to the Mike and Ross Feather Show. So, Jimmy, tell me, where did you live before the flood?
Well, I have a little place out bush where I run away to, bit of a bushy, and I have a studio in Lismore where I live when I'm working. And it's at Lake Street in Lismore. So it's the first place that goes under in North Lismore.
Right. So where are you living now?
Well, in my daughter's spare room at the moment. I'm very lucky. Family's taken me in.
Right. Any stories come to mind?
Of course, we're talking stories. I'm full of stories, but stories about the flood. That's what we're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah.
The flood. Well, I suppose the biggest story for me was, well, packing it all up, all my studio. And so I ended up packing it up 4 times. I started packing up on the Thursday because I'm the first person to go under, I have to be ready. And we put it all up into the loft of the studio. But that wasn't enough. We all had to take it all down out of the loft and then take it upstairs and put it on the veranda, which was out of what we thought was the flood level. It was above the 1974 flood level. So that was the second time we moved it up there. And then I spent all afternoon and evening on the Sunday as the water came into the studio, but then kept coming. I kept going back down into the flood water and bringing things up until the water was a bit under my nipples, if I'm allowed to say. Anyway, so we just kept moving things up and up, but in the end 4 times. We moved things 4 times, and I suppose the really wild story was when we realised it was going to come through the floor of the house where it had never come through. We're in a house, if you can imagine, on stilts, right above the flood water, right above the studio. And my mate Aidan is there, and we're still connected to the net, and he's got a little computer, and it was like he was the captain of the Starship Enterprise, because all the lights were out, but there was this little glowing computer showing the bomb, showing that the weather was getting more and more wild and more radical. And he then said, "It's coming through the floor." And I went, "Oh my God." And his lounge room was littered with my puppets and my master tapes and my paintings and my folios. My shit was everywhere in his house. And then they said, "Well, there's nothing we can do." The people we were with said, "There's nothing we can do." I went, "What do you mean?" They said, "Well, we left the ladders downstairs because no one ever thought it was coming into the house. And so we couldn't get to the manhole." And then I'm looking at basically my artistic heritage sitting on the floor. And I went, "Well, I'm not going down here. Come on, guys, we can do better than this. Let's build a tower out of furniture to the manhole." So we put a table, and then we put a linen box on top of the table. On top of that, we put a bar stool, and with a bit of gymnastics, or whatever you want to call it, bush gymnastics, I was able to climb up the tower and throw myself into the roof. And then my friends were able to pass me stuff up. So we put both families' art collections, everything we could really. In the end, we had stage lights, costumes, and even a PA. We could have run a festival up in the roof. Anyway, at dawn, Aidan's neighbours started screaming for help, and he went, "Jimmy, I've got to go. I've got to go rescue people." We had always intended to go out on the flood and film him rescuing people. So I actually had my phone and everything charged. Anyway, I said to him, "Look, you go off and do what you do. I'm just going to stay here at the house." So in the end, I was there all alone, just with the dog, as the water kept rising and rising, putting more and more stuff up in the roof. And then the water hit the bottom of the top of the table. So the table started to float. And so, but every time I stepped on the table to put more stuff in the roof, it pushed the table back down. Yeah, so there we were, the table was floating, but the water kept coming up. And then the linen box started to float. So I'm stepping on the table, that's pushing it back down on the floor and then onto the linen box, but it all starts to be very Cat in the Hat, and I'm stepping up onto this floating tower. I'm not a surfer, I'm not in the pit circus, and I did several missions up into the roof, and then I looked at the little dog and said, "I'm not in the pit circus, we better stop now." So I sat up in the roof, And I could see down into the room below, and I could see it coming up to we're talking the upstairs in the house on stilts. I can see it over the window now. I watched a lizard swim past. I sat up there and I thought, well, it's probably best to ring Aidan and say, time to come back and get me. So I rang them up and they said, yep, we'll get to you when we finish our rescues. They took about another hour and a half. Little did I know that they weren't rescuing people anymore. They were actually saving lives. While I'd been saving art collections, they were saving lives. Usually with the floods, my mate goes out and rescues people and does beer deliveries. Well, it was a little bit more than that this time. So they came back to get me, and then they were yelling outside, going, Jimmy, come out to the boat. And I said, well, I can't come out, I'm in here, but they couldn't hear me. And I said to Aidan later, look, you knew I was all right. You know I'm capable. You knew I was all right all the time, didn't you? And he went, yes, except when we got back to the house. I said, what do you mean? I was yelling to you. He said, we couldn't hear you, mate. So the rain was pouring down and they couldn't hear me. So Aidan pushed his way into the house, but then he got to the room I was in, but the furniture was floating now and blocking the door. And he said, Jimmy, you have to come out. And I said, I can't come out. I need you to come in and help me. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, push against the door, push, and you'll see why. And he came in and he went, oh my God. And there was the floating tower of furniture, all higgledy-piggledy floating, but still in place. And he said, well, you've got to come down. And I said, yeah, mate, but I've got one chance to get up and down, and we've got to get the dog out of here as well. And he went, oh my God. Anyway, so I'd wrapped up my computer and my phone in a waterproof bag, and I went down first with that. And as I went down the whole tower, Aidan was holding the tower, but it all collapsed and we went into the water, but somehow the computer bag ended up in the bar stool and didn't go underwater. But then we had to rebuild the tower and get the dog. And my dog's pretty good with me, but I climbed up the wiggly tower again with Aidan trying to hold it all and balance it in place. And then the dog didn't want to come down. And I'm going, please come down. And then she went and hid in the recesses of the roof, and I'm going whistling to her, come on, Burrito, come. And eventually she trusted me, jumped into my arms, and then I tried to get down the tower, and once again it collapsed. But this time we were fine, and we fought our way out to the front door through all the floating furniture. And then some giant paintings that we bought up the afternoon before and put on the veranda, they were now floating. And there was no way to get to the boat without climbing on top of the paintings. And that to me is the image, my image of the flood is my dog sitting on the painting, floating on top of the painting, and then climbing into the onto the painting to get into the boat. And
So there's your next painting.
yeah. Anyway, it was obviously very, very dangerous, and so we had to climb underneath the electrical wires. But once I got into the boat, we'd always planned to film the flood. And after that, after working for 24 hours, you know, and every bone and muscle of my body aching from carrying all those things up and down the stairs for 24 hours, I turned on the camera. And then because the rescues, they were done for the moment, Aidan Ricketts took me into North Lismore, and in the middle of the eye of the storm, we filmed the flood. Probably maybe, I don't know, 6 inches or a foot till we reached the maximum level. So we went and filmed, the water lapping at the upstairs veranda of the Winsome Hotel, and, well, the rest of it. So in all of that chaos of the storm, we went out and made art. It was a very interesting experience because my stage manager, Tim, was in the boat. And so every time we went under a wire, he said duck. I've been working on films and animations a lot, and Aidan's been taking a role in coming down to the studio and helping direct them, so that although I had my eye in the camera, Tim stage managed me, and then Aidan was the director going, get that, get this, let's go back and get this. And in the middle of that storm, we made quite an artistic document, and I think that's my flood story. Where other people were traumatised, I was given a rip-roaring adventure, which doesn't completely sit well with me. because afterwards I went to South Lismore and to help a friend with her studio, and it was like Pearl Harbor in the aftermath of that, and I just really feel for people like my friend Robin, whose studio went under, because I still am having trouble coming to grips with what I saw happen to the people in South Lismore. They didn't get a rural giant agricultural flood like we did in North Lismore. They got, I don't know, Pearl Harbor. They got diesel and gasoline, and I don't even know how people survived and are even alive. So that was probably the second part of my story.